But I understand. My always thing is if you understand priorities of the situation, you can make it a lot simpler, and priority number one, and once again, I'm talking from a law enforcement standpoint, but it can be for a civilian as well. As priority number one is citizens that are in immediate danger, that, active situation. Your next priority is yourself or citizens as a whole that aren't in danger, but could be if we don't isolate or in that threat. And then when we talk about from a law enforcement, third priority is law enforcement. They're a high priority, but they're the ones responding. And then the last priority you always have to take consideration are the suspects you're dealing with. We have to be reasonable and necessary. We have to come to grips with that as well. But you start breaking that down where is anybody in immediate danger? And if they're not, do we even need to respond? Or is the situation where you're out with your wife and your children and maybe, maybe you should just extricate yourself from this situation and not even involved? It all becomes what the situation is will dictate what we're doing. And once again, having that flexible mindset to react to that. So.
Hello and welcome to Making Shooters Better, brought to you by Laser Ammo. I'm your host, Terry, and I think most shooters, concealed carry holders, home defenders, every single one of us at some point has had that quiet moment where we wonder, would our skills be enough? Things went really badly. Would what we know and the skills that we have rise to the occasion? Well, if you've ever wondered how instinct, pressure, and skill collide in those first few critical seconds, then this is the guest that you will not want to miss. Mike Willis is a former SWAT point man and team leader who built training systems around what actually keeps people alive when chaos hits. His reality-based programs, which are used by agencies across the country, focus on instinctive response, high-pressure decision-making, and the skills that should, we hope, hold up when precision matters most. He created the Instinctive hand-to-hand combat system and teaches nationally recognized active shooter response and tactical entry courses that are used by agencies coast to coast. Mike is a frequent instructor at academies, fight gyms, and national conferences, and his work has been featured in training media, including Police Magazine and the American Lawman series. Mike, welcome, mate.
Thanks for having me, Terry. Great to be here.
So how old were you when you first started shooting?
I probably first started shooting, I'd say somewhere 9 or 10 years old. My first introduction was the BB gun from my father. And my dad was a kind of an active hunter and got us started pretty young. And like I said, it started there and just kind of grew. So.
It's awesome. And a BB gun was your first rifle?
First thing I started with was the BB gun. My dad used to do instruction on hunter safety, and I remember he made me go. The first couple years, he didn't think I was old enough to hunt, but he made me go through the program and even take the test. But he wouldn't turn it in to get my certification till I think I was 10 or 11. But I finally got it, and then it was introduction from there to. I got my first 22, and went out and thought I was a great hunter, and then from there it was we did a lot of bird hunting when I was a kid, and he took me out. My first shotgun I got to carry was a single shot 410, and I don't think I ever hit anything with it, but I sure felt good walking around acting like I knew what I was doing. So.
That's funny though, because I started shooting fairly early, and when my kids sort of got to the right age, I introduced all of them to shooting at an early age. Now, my son kind of naturally found his groove with shooting. He was the most enthusiastic about it. And he would go around clearing the house. And one of the rules was he could use this a Nerf gun, but he couldn't point it at his sisters and he couldn't point it at us. He could point it at inanimate objects. But it was amazing because after just a few little lessons, he's running around like high speed, low drag, pie in the corners, sweeping. It was amazing to watch. And he was probably 7 or 8 when he started doing that.
That's awesome.
It was brilliant to watch. And one of the first times I took him hunting, he was maybe around 9 or 10. He was the only kid in a pack of kids, and actually a lot of dads on this particular trip, with his finger off the trigger the whole time, never pointed his rifle at anybody. So all those lessons, starting that early, became a a big part of who he was when it came to firearm handling.
Yeah, that the safety aspect, the confidence aspect, that's huge. That's great to hear. It's kind of interesting. I wasn't introduced to my dad wasn't really a handgun shooter, and he had one. I got to shoot it a few times when I was a kid, but my introduction to handguns wasn't until I was probably a teenager, and that was more from friends of mine that had them, and then I became, kind of enamored with them. But that weapon safety is always something that's been driven into me. From the very get-go, and that importance of that, obviously finger off the trigger, muzzle discipline, that goes a long ways. So
Yeah, it does. And it's always interesting to watch people who've spent a lot of time with rifles make some often crazy mistakes just because the pistol length is obviously so short. And they're not thinking. With a rifle, it's very easy to see where that muzzle ends up because it's, 3 feet from your face. But with a pistol being such a small tool, I've seen people, they've been shooting their whole life with rifles, they're suddenly handling a pistol and they're moving from side to side or doing things, and you're like, hold on a minute, look where that muzzle's pointing, either sweeping themselves or the people around them. It's crazy to see, because I think that pistols are such a unique tool and takes specific skills to become proficient, not only in accuracy but certainly in safety.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. One of the biggest things that I find in training that we work with people on, people as a general rule understand the importance of keeping their finger off the trigger, but what we call flagging, that muzzle discipline problem, is something that people often do quite a bit. They don't realize they're doing it, and it's something they have to be totally aware of. So if we can kind of break that bad habit and to make it a good habit, just be honest. There's a high-profile incident earlier this year in Butler, Pennsylvania, where you can see a couple Secret Service agents flagging the entire crowd for quite some time, and it's one of those things where people don't realize they're doing. You have to have total awareness all the time, and it has to be drilled into you where it's just something you naturally instinctively do to watch that muzzle discipline.
Agreed. And obviously getting that consistency in training is important because, as you just mentioned with what happened in Pennsylvania, these guys are Secret Service. They are, arguably some of the most well-trained firearms handlers in the business, and they were making mistakes, which sort of brings me nicely to that. What happens for most people in the first few seconds of a critical incident, and obviously that was on full display in Butler, is the stress impacts everything. Like it is the thing that immediately results in the wheels coming off. So as you are now our resident expert, what actually happens inside someone during the first few seconds of a critical incident?
I think what immediately happens is we revert to our training and our instincts right off the bat. Your natural body reactions to stress, to fear, is to get in that kind of fight or flight stance, and then it becomes how you train for these situations. And once again, are you going to get overwhelmed with the situation, trying to not get totally overwhelmed by the situation? Can you see the big picture, start making decisions? I think that immediate response is you're going to go back to how you trained and what your instincts are. And if you have no training on it, that's where people are going to be overwhelmed. They're going to have tunnel vision. They're not going to see the big picture. And in a lot of these critical, huge incidents, seeing the big picture is everything, because there's so many things going around. Trying to identify what is actually a threat and what is benign becomes vital. So
when you're training people and trying to get them to a place where they do utilize their skills and their training rather than just defaulting back to the monkey brain, do you have a few go-to training approaches or strategies that you use to help build people's tolerances up to stress?
Absolutely. We kind of start the day off with kind of that crawl, walk, run mentality. We're starting off with just some basic entry tactics: how to get through a door, how we're clearing a room, how we're doing the weapons handling. Some very basics. The basics will never let you down. I've always said that you become advanced by doing the basics well, and getting that confidence, kind of building up that confidence. So we introduce it with honestly, starting off the day with red guns, inert red guns, no players, no bad guys. Truth be told, so much of training in the law enforcement field, but this goes over to security, is what I call failure-based or ego-based training. It has to be enhancement-based. So we start off the day very, very calm, just getting some entries, tell them there's no stress, there's no bad guy, just getting some comfort level. And then we build on that, where you're adding in players in different roles and scenarios and things, and it gets to an ultimate point where you are having force on force and shot response and all these different things. But you have to kind of build to it, trying to build that confidence. It's not only confidence, in my case, it's not just confidence in the individual, but it's confidence in the people you're working with, because and that stress is, if I'm over, or if I'm seeing a room in itself, I've got to clear this room. It's going to take me X amount of time. If you and I are comfortable with each other and we have total confidence in each other, we go in together. I've only got to worry about 50% of that room. If you trust the people you work with, you start lessening your responsibilities, start lessening your stress, and the more we can lessen the stress is the better. So I think it's just about reducing the amount of stress, trying to not rush to failure kind of mentality. So,
yeah, slowing down before getting them to speed up. It's interesting because I've had a couple of instances where I've taken people into a shoot house and everybody wants to move fast. Everybody's like, I got to clear it. They've seen it in the movies a million times. They're like, yeah, you just go fast. And I'm like, I know your adrenaline's pumping because, you're puckered up, because even though it's training, maybe we're using the simunitions or something that's going to cause, a little bit of discomfort, but everybody speeds up. And I'm like, no, this is where we actually want to slow it down, because you're not SEAL Team 6. And there isn't 8 of you to go into this room and make sure you have total dominance. I'm a big believer in let's take a big deep breath, slow it down at the threshold, fight from the door if possible, slice the pie. And it's interesting to watch how much some people struggle with slowing down when their adrenaline hits.
That's absolutely true. And I think, and that goes not just in shooting and tactics, but it goes in defensive tactics. People tend to, let's rush through it to get done with it. When we're, just to give you an example, when we're teaching like ground combatives and we're showing a simple escape, whatever it may be, and you try to get people to understand the technique first, but they just want to blow through it and be done with it. And it's usually because they're overwhelmed by it. But if you slow it down and get them comfortable with it and let them do it over and over and over, and repetition is the key, especially repetition with good skills. Not doing the same thing, wrong things over and over, but developing those good habits over and over, then you can start building up the speed. You talk about, SEAL Team 6. You're not even saying if they're at that level, but if the more you do this with people, the more you can't do the basics too much. When we talk about entries, and most of the classes I'm doing are a 1-day program. We've broken it down to 1-day program because that is what most people have time for, and we're trying to get as many room entries, different things we can in one day, but it's just laying a foundation. You've got to go out yourself, kind of like you talked about with your son, and just clear your house. Do these things at home. I've always said I'm probably a weird guy, but you can see me walking through my house, clearing it, doing tactics all the time, because I guess I need to get a better hobby, but you can't do this stuff too much. And if you do it with your friends, your coworkers, and you start, what they're going to do before they do it, and you have confidence in them, you start lessening responsibilities, you stop being overwhelmed by the situation. That's kind of the key. So.
Yeah, it's always interesting because my wife catches me frequently going around clearing the house, but she's gotten used to my eccentricities over the years. So now she sees it going on, she's like, oh, all right, he's up to his old tricks again. But that's the only way, I think, to get familiar with the challenges of your home environment, because that's the only way when you start looking at it from, okay, if somebody was hiding from me and I had to, of course, I always recommend for someone, unless they absolutely have to leave their room, stay where you are and hold that ambush position. However, there are going to be cases frequently where people are going to have to go out and clear their home. They got other people in the house. They're not all, like right now we're empty nesters. It's just me and my wife. But when the kids are home, you can't just leave them, hanging in their own rooms. If you're the protector, you're going out to protect. But figuring out how to move around your own home, where those really the dead spots are and where your good ambush positions would be, both from an offensive and defensive position. I think this is time well spent.
I agree. And, something that you kind of hit on there is having a flexible mindset. No two situations are the same. Sometimes we get caught up in that we're going to do this or we're going to do that, but the situation will dictate whether we are in that hunt mode or we're having to respond to, once again, maybe our children are in another room, or just sit tight and hunker down for our own ambush. I mean, everything's different. Some of the things that I try to simplify things because I don't think I'm that smart, but I understand. My always thing is if you understand priorities of the situation, you can make it a lot simpler, and priority number one, and once again, I'm talking from a law enforcement standpoint, but it can be for a civilian as well. As priority number one is citizens that are in immediate danger, that, active situation. Your next priority is yourself or citizens as a whole that aren't in danger, but could be if we don't isolate or in that threat. And then when we talk about from a law enforcement, third priority is law enforcement. They're a high priority, but they're the ones responding. And then the last priority you always have to take consideration are the suspects you're dealing with. We have to be reasonable and necessary. We have to come to grips with that as well. But you start breaking that down where is anybody in immediate danger? And if they're not, do we even need to respond? Or is the situation where you're out with your wife and your children and maybe, maybe you should just extricate yourself from this situation and not even involved? It all becomes, what the situation is will dictate what we're doing. And once again, having that flexible mindset to react to that. So.
Yeah, I agree. And that's you touched on something there where, yes, we can probably clear our house if we've practiced, if we've put in the training, if we've gone to classes and then we come home and we practice what we've learned. But the question I always try to instill in people is to ask themselves, should I? Like, what's the goal here? If the goal is preservation of life and everything you love is in the room with you, where are you going?
Yeah, well
hold
said.
that position. I think a lot of times, and there's something else you said with ego. This is my house, damn it, and I'm going out to get him. And trust me, I'm as bloody minded as the next person. I've been a long time out of the military, but that whole Royal Marine Commando mindset of I'm going to get somebody, that's still in there. But I'm just old enough now and like to think maybe wise enough to go, hold on a minute, everything I care about's in this room with me. Do I need to go out there? Or would I be better off, holding my position here and waiting for them, if that happens, to come to me?
Yeah, well said.
Just weighing up.
Yeah, well said. I mean, making things, maybe the other thing is to simplify it is how can I make things better? And me going out and dying a heroic death is not going to make things better. It's going to be bad for me, but I'm putting other people in danger, obviously. So how can I make it better? And once again, if all the things I love are in that room, take care of that. But it's also along those lines, having that situational awareness to not get overwhelmed by the situation or anything else, being aware of threats, dangers, all these things. Where's your exits? Once again, I'm sure you're like me. You go into a restaurant, it's a rush with my friends in law enforcement, but my wife understands that I'm always going to have my back to the wall and seeing the door and where are the exits, who's in there. And it's not because I'm paranoid. It's just that situational awareness that we have to have all the time to have that peace of mind, because otherwise you're going to be playing catch up, being overwhelmed, and you're going to be in the dark like everybody else. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, it's not paranoia, it's preparation. And
Sure.
And you instinctively that the likelihood is the restaurant you happen to be sitting in is not going to be the one that's targeted. However, but you hope for the best and plan for the worst. And for many years, while my kids were, still in my care, I would teach them, look for this, watch for that, amongst other things with the exits. I would say, okay, we'd sit in the restaurant at the table before we order the food. I'd say, okay, how many males are in this room with us? Give me a description of the 3 that are closest to us. Things like that to challenge how they assess their environment. Do a resource assessment. Okay, you have nothing else on you as a defensive tool. What could you use from the table? What could you use from the next table? Things like that got them looking and thinking about their environment a bit differently. And I never did it from a a fear-mongering stance. It was always empowerment. I'm like, you are now more observant than everybody else. You're more prepared than everybody else. And it worked. And it was funny because I went to a restaurant with my family, and of course, immediately everybody sort of holds while I figure out which chair I'm going to get. And my son, who at this point was probably around 10 or 11, he's like, hey, I want to watch the door. And he wanted to take the prime real estate. And I said, that's absolutely fine, as long as you are prepared to deal with whatever comes through the door. And you could see him think
That's
this
funny.
through for a minute. And he said, all right, Dad, you got the door.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, mates, if you're a firearms dealer, a range owner, or an instructor, and you'd like to create another revenue stream for yourself without having to necessarily sell a kidney, becoming a laser ammo dealer might be the best move you can make for yourself in the next 12 months. Our dry fire gear trains new shooters, old shooters, competitive shooters, even that one guy that insists he was really good back in '98. And for my law enforcement listeners, if you're tired of watching your ammo budget evaporate faster than the truth during a traffic stop, Laser Ammo has your fix. Recoil kits, simulators, CQB targets, force-on-force training tools, all the stuff that makes officers sharper without you having to burn through a single live round. So whether you're teaching civilians, training cops, or just want gear your department will actually use on the daily, reach out to me, Terry, at laserammo.com, and I'll get you squared away with a kind of high-speed, low-drag, skills-building gear you'll wish you'd invested in years ago. Now, back to the episode.
And it's tactical thinking. And you talked about how we prepare people. We start off today, like I said, that crawl, walk, run. But as we start introducing some tactical thinking, where can I position myself to be a safer position? Where can I, what's the safest place for me? How's the best way to clear this secondary? If you slow it down a little bit and start reading a room, you get better at it. And you can do it 10 times. That's another thing. You can do something 10 times and you might do it a little different every time, but you start, trying to assess what's the best under this current circumstances, and roll with it. And they also have to have the ability to look back after and go, gosh, could I have done that better? You kind of relook at things and what can I do to improve this next time this happens or next time I do this, and to be a little critical of yourself. You got to give yourself credit for some things, but also say, hey, this is where I could have improved, a little bit. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's also a key point, is to self-assess, internalize, be introspective over it. What did I miss? Be honest with yourself when you do miss something, because you're going to. You can be as alert as, I don't know, secret agent level alertness and still miss something.
Sure.
You're one person. One of the things I always taught, both with my family and the people I taught personal safety classes too, is if you're a family of 4, I mean, that's a lot of eyeballs scanning if everybody's looking. You can't, obviously to a point you want to be responsible for as much of the scanning as possible, but if everybody's looking for similar cues from when the environment or the people around you, that's a lot of eyeballs. That's help. That means if you do miss something, maybe somebody else in your group didn't.
Absolutely. And not only that, what from your angle or my angle, what you see might not be what I see. And, having these different angles and sight lines and coverage areas become huge, because once again, you can have 2 people that are in the same event that don't actually see the same situation. So that's so important to have, once again, aware of your surroundings, how you kind of set up. Like I said, it's the rush when the guys that I have working, we go out and across the country, we go to dinner at night and it becomes the rush to who gets to sit with their back to the wall and hang the other guys out to dry. It's kind of but we all do it instinctively. Just, it's what we do. And it once again becomes that habit of what you do. It's, you don't think about it. It's not something that's conscious, just like being aware of your surroundings, be aware of people. And it's not a paranoia. It just becomes who you are. And I think any responsible firearms carrier should have that mentality. It's not just about having the firearm on you; it's having that that awareness of, and it's not paranoia. No one's ever going to know it unless it's important. But most people live with their head uh, purely inserted in their apps on their phone, and they're totally unaware of what's going on. And just having that awareness, and once again, being recognizing that there might not be a threat, but there could be. And
Yeah.
it's something we talk about at our active shooter training. Is I can't. Everybody there statistically will probably never respond to a mass active shooter. But somewhere in the next few days, if not today, there will be another one somewhere. And I just can't, you don't know where it's going to be. So,
Yeah. And you have to go into your environment knowing it could be you or that environment on this particular day. So obviously you spent a lot of time, a lot of years on a SWAT team. What was the moment you think that taught you the most about decision making under stress? Do you have one instance?
there's actually, it was kind of an evolution, as you probably had the same. At first you're kind of overwhelmed and you're trying to just not mess up, like everything else, and do training. But as time goes by, you get comfortable with it, you start seeing the big picture. You still got the adrenaline, but you're controlling it, you get better. One that always jumped out at me is, we were getting ready, and I hate telling war stories, but we were getting ready to hit a high risk warrant, and I'm up front and I'm getting ready to call up our RAM guy to hit this door. And we've got it all planned out. He's going to hit the door. We're going to go in, we're going to do all these things. And as I'm standing there, I'm just about ready to call him up. I hear the doorknob start going. And so I'm like, well, wait a minute. I can just wait and let them open it for me. And they did about the time somebody was coming out to get a smoke break at 3 a.m. But, here we are. Let them open the door, took that person down. Everybody went in without actually very quiet, and basically caught everyone in their beds. But that's one that always jumped out at me, because if I would have had the early on, I probably would have said, this is the plan. I got to call a RAM guy up. He's going to hit the door. And he probably would have been hitting the door, knocking it through the guy's chest, but it's just kind of, that was one that is like, let things come to you when they can. Things get hurried up and messed up all by themselves. But if we can kind of let it come to us sometimes. But I think it was an evolution. It took a while. You're kind of overwhelmed initially. And then the more, not just operations, but more in training, you get comfortable in the people you're with, and you start understanding what your priorities are, what your responsibilities are, and things like that. So like I said, it's a slow evolution, but that one always jumped out at me. It's like, wow, if I just slow down, I just let them open the door, it's going to be a much easier day for us, and let it play out.
Yeah. So pre-entry, I don't know, but do you spend a little bit of time with some breathing? Are you internalizing? Okay, get my heart rate down. I want to be thinking as clearly as possible. Like I'm trying to visualize you standing on the threshold, point man, which is always obviously one of the most dangerous places to be, going first through the door. What are you doing inside your own head to ensure clarity of thought?
As I evolved in that, one of the big things was to trust your instincts. And like I said, to stop outside, take a deep breath, let your senses take over. Do you hear anything? Obviously, do you see anything, but do you hear anything? Do you hear a TV on there? Is somebody up watching TV, or are they moving around? Do you smell something? Is somebody cooking breakfast, or are they smoking the weed? I mean, whatever it may be, all these senses, are cooking burritos, whatever it may be. Let your senses take over, slow down, try to control that breathing a little bit. You're controlling adrenaline is all you're doing. You've got to have the fear, but you just try to control it. And so you're not getting tunnel vision. So that was absolutely when the case then, when we're getting ready to hit these, is to kind of take that deep breath. Our deal was, once everyone tapped up to, if I was first in line, that didn't mean go. That means everyone's ready. Yes. And then we go when I'm ready. And that's kind of our philosophy, which is what we push at training. The only difference that a lot of the training I do now is kind of active shooter based. Unfortunately, you don't have that ability to necessarily take your time, take a deep breath. So you've got to kind of gather yourself as you're responding to these things and try to control that breathing, see the big picture. And a lot of that's just how you carry your weapon. If you lock out and you're getting tired and getting tunnel vision before you get there, that's what you're going to have when you arrive, is trying to, have that comfort level. How you moving with the weapon it's one of those things, if you've never done it before, go out and work with it. That weapons handling, but trying to control your breathing the best you can before you get there, that's the time you have to do that in an active situation. So
Yeah, and I think for those of us who've spent, and mine was just a finite period back in the 90s with the military, we've had instances where we have had to be very conscientious about where our gun is, that we're not the weak link in the chain. You know, we're working together as part of the team without flagging everybody, or I should say, in the real world, minimal flagging of everybody, because unfortunately it does happen in the real world.
True.
But you try to cut it down to the bare minimum. But most civilians have never done that. They've never had a person right behind them who, for whatever reason, keeps constantly, pointing something at you that they shouldn't. They haven't had that stress. And of course, especially when it comes to active shooter situations, you're not going to get any warning, most likely. The first you know that an incident is happening is the auditory signal that probably skyrockets your heart rate. If you recognize that it's even shots being fired, depending on where it comes from in the building. So for someone in that situation, you talked about breathing. I'm a big believer in box breathing as a specific tool to help bring heart rate down. But can you share why getting your heart rate back down is so important?
I think it's that kind of auditory exclusion. You start getting stressed out and you get that tunnel vision where your whole world's a little tube right in front of you and you're not hearing things. You're not, those people behind you, you're not even realizing they're there anymore. If you don't control that breathing, control your heart rate, and learn to control adrenaline, you are going to be taking yourself into deep water when you don't have to. And it's one of those things where that came to me from training. I think when I first started, I was a little overwhelmed, that it just became from doing it over and over and getting that experience. And that experience, obviously, it's great to have the real world call outs, but a lot of that just came from training, learning how to slow it down, deep breaths through your nose, exhale, and just as you're moving, and also to make sure you are breathing. Under stress, people hold their breath.
Yes, they do.
It's a true thing, especially in once again, the defensive tactics world is under stress. People, they tense up, hold their breath, and it's like fighting underwater. If you train that way, that you're always breathing, making yourself breathe, it becomes what you do, and you don't even think about it. That becomes a godsend under stress, because you will revert to how you've prepared for this. So,
yeah, and it is interesting to watch people pre-exercise training tense up, and part of the freeze, flight, or fight response, and it is in that order, people lock down. And breathing, as far as a sort of evolutionary roots, breathing was a sound and or a potential smell that a predator might pick up on. So holding your breath is one of those natural responses that those who have not experienced, stress to that degree are prone to do and not know why. And you're like, okay, look at me, take 3 breaths. And they're like, oh, I didn't even realize. You can see all the air come out of them. And you're like, there it is. And they're like, oh, wow. And then, you can see their vision open back up again and cognition return. And it's funny because most people because they don't experience stress to the degree that, even training can produce. They're not aware of what their body's going to do. They're not aware they're going to freeze up. They're not aware they're going to lose cognitive abilities. Their hands are going to shake. They're going to lose fine motor skills. They don't know. And that, for most people, I think is one of the biggest hurdles to responding either appropriately or as tactically proficiently as possible, is their own physiological and psychological response to stress.
Yeah, it's funny when you said about somebody telling you to take 3 breaths. I talked about, we start off the day kind of that crawl where they're going in a room with no players, just clearing rooms. They're nervous. And a lot of their nervousness are because their past has been people constantly yelling at them, they're not doing this right, which is not what we're doing, that failure base. But one of the things I probably say more to a lot of people is walk up and say, okay, I need you to do something for me. One thing for me. What's that? I want you to relax and breathe. And
Yes.
they're like, just relax. This is a time to, get your fundamentals down. And if you have that mindset, once again, it carries over. And as the day goes on, you talk to them, it's like, gosh, does that make a difference? Another thing, just talk about weapons handling. They're locked out with they're punched out, they're stiff, they're rigid. And we're trying to, look, you need to bring this in, relax, try to see the big picture. because you think about, really, I'm not just talking about active shooter events, but any kind of critical incident where you have a lot of people, you're going to be surrounded by potential threats. Most of those are going to be benign. They're not your threat, but you're looking for that needle in the haystack, and you can't do it by having your arms and weapon out in front of you and seeing down the middle of a tube.
Mm-hmm.
What we really need to focus on to keep us safe is hands. Can we see everyone's hands? That's what's going to hurt us.
Yeah.
And kind of relax. But if you're stressed out, you're not seeing, we do drills, and I'm sure you did them in the military, where we'll have a person in a room sitting at a desk maybe, and they're coming in. They're not necessarily a threat, but there'll be a weapon right beside them, and they're not going to grab it or anything. But afterwards, we're like, okay, is the room clear? Everyone, they may have taken the person down. Okay, what about the weapon? What weapon? Nobody even
Yeah.
saw it, and they're so tunnel vision focused on things that the more we can get comfortable with seeing the big picture, the better it's going to be for us. So.
Yeah, and I think that draws a distinction as well between the mechanics of a strategy or a tactic and actually cognitively engaging with the reasons behind that strategy or tactic. Going into a room to clear a room, there are a lot of mechanical elements to that. I'm sweeping left and right. My muzzle is here. I'm driving the firearm, whether it's a rifle or a pistol, out front as soon as I've cleared that threshold, and I need to be able to engage as accurately as possible. But people will go in using those mechanics, but not really thinking about, okay, this situation looks different than the one I expected to encounter. And then there's no adaptability. They don't collapse in. They're not changing what they're doing because, well, shit, I had a plan. This was my plan. And even though the environment now says it should be something different that you're doing at this point, cognitively, they're not there. Like they're completely checked out. They're like, okay, think for a minute, take that breath. But I love what you said about that calm, empathetic type of style of teaching, because I've done that myself. You can see somebody is wound really tight.
Absolutely.
And just giving them a little bit of a smile and saying, hey, let's take some breaths. What are we looking to achieve here, or whatever the question may be, and suddenly see them go, oh, okay, and you can see, life returning to their eyes, and maybe they're not, these big owl-sized appendages sticking out of their skull.
Yeah, absolutely. That flexible mindset, and something you talked about, it's not what you think it's going to be or not what your plan is. I think, Mike Tyson said it best. Everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face. You've got to be able to roll with the way things get thrown at you. When you go into a building and for example, maybe we're at a school teaching people but we're not teaching for this facility. It can be for any facility. The basics carry over to any structure. The teamwork principles always are the same, or whether an individual, the main fundamentals don't change. If you get it locked in your head, it's going to be a certain way, and it's not, then you're playing catch up to that. And if you can have that, I'm going to roll with it and see how it plays out. You mentioned earlier about, you hear something you think's a shot. Is it a shot? It's one thing that if people have never experienced gunfire or even simulation of gunfire in a structure, everybody that's never been involved in it thinks, oh, it's going to be very easy to locate that or determine if it's gunfire. It is not. I have been on calls where people are yelling shots fired. It turned out to be it was a vehicle that backfired. It's just, whether it's fireworks or if it is shots fired, somebody thinks it's fireworks, but inside a structure, trying to locate that is very difficult, and you really have to have all your senses around you to determine where that's coming from and where the threat is. So,
yeah, one of the bits of equipment that we have at Laser Ammo is a shot box. And have you used it?
We utilize it at every training we do at the shoot. It actually has been a difference maker. And I went through years of everything from having apps on my phone on a speaker to have, simulate shots, to banging on trash cans, to I had a cap gun at one time. We've used blanks.
Everything.
We've used everything. That shot box, if you're not familiar with it, not only is it is incredible with the shot simulation, but what it has is the muzzle flash. So
Yeah.
the sound is simply a direction. Sound gives us a direction. Okay, it's that way. It's to the left, to the right. But you're in a hallway. You go to a school, a hospital, an office complex might have a hallway that's 100 yards long, and is it on the left? Is it on the right? Is it the third door, the eighth door? Sound is just going to get you that direction. Then you look for things like muzzle flash, movement, blood trail, shot casings. That's going to determine where the threat is. And that's why the shot box has been a difference maker, not only because of the sound, but because that muzzle flash, to give you that people that cue of, okay, it's in this room. Let's respond to that. Let's take care of business. And I will
Yeah.
tell you, we utilize that along with the laser ammo CQB targets. We do a whole segment where they are simply, we get a long hallway, they're around the corner, and we keep moving it around. We're having people respond to that shot, finding the bad guy, take out the bad guy. And call them wins. It's win based. Go down there, win, win, win. Then we can also start catching people when they're going into rooms, they start doing things that we talked about not doing. They go right at the target, never get out of the fatal funnel. And we get to, kind of reintroduce, hey, why we're doing this, and they get to see it. But those two products together is a game changer because people get to experience. If you've never experienced shots fired in a structure,
Yes.
it's something you need to experience because it can be as difficult as on a T hallway. Is it to my right or is it to my left? And until I get to that T intersection, I might not know until we get there. So it's huge. So
yeah, and for those who haven't come across a shot box, this is 125 decibels of as close to the sound that a shot will sound like inside a building. This thing is so loud, and for anyone who's not been in a building when someone's been letting off rounds, it's very hard to explain to them how impactful that is. And I've seen active shooter training where people have, up until having this equipment, have had to improvise in much the same way as you banging on cans, yelling bang. I've seen it all.
Done that.
And you're like, like, and the response, particularly from faculty or other members of staff who have never been around it turns into a bit of a giggle fest. Everyone's just like, yeah, great, that's scary. And then everyone starts laughing as they half-heartedly barricade a door. But you put that shot box outside the door in the hallway, and you will watch people immediately have that visceral response to the sound, and shit got real. And suddenly everyone's moving with the kind of speed and purpose that they should have been practicing all along. It is a phenomenal piece of kit.
Absolutely. And right there, you hit it is we watch, when we introduce it to a scenario where there are, shots fired, and you literally see knees buckle.
Yes.
And then knees buckle, and then you got to go on. The other thing that you can do with that product, which is a great thing, is I will turn it on its side facing our people coming down, for example, hallway, and our bad guy steps out, and they think they're getting shot at. They're seeing that flash and happen to experience, what the body does naturally, because the knees buckle. The other thing you see is if they're on a wall, they're trying to make a hole in that wall because people are trying to get to cover, which is a natural response.
Completely natural.
And you got to learn how you're going to respond, and then you've got to gain yourself and then deal with the situation. It has been a game changer. It's a great product. Like I said, between that and the laser ammo products and the shooting allows us to get our training as close as we can to reality in a safe environment. And also allows us to play it over and over and over. Like I talked about when we're doing the response to the CQB targets. They might mess it up the first times, but they're going to do it 20, 30 times. And after the end of the day, it becomes the other thing that happens, and you probably, I know you from your military days, from our days of throwing flashbangs, you get to where you don't even notice it. They're going off where other people are getting overwhelmed, but they start getting, okay, the shots are just a fact of life. I've got to go respond. And you stop thinking about it. You stop being overwhelmed by it because you get used to it. It's amazing what you can get used to, and that's kind of it's a great tool for that as well. So,
yeah. And I think that's great that you do repeat it over and over and over. So that exposure shows the cracks in the response. Because I once had a group, and we were talking, it was just a small portion of the class I was teaching, but we were talking about active shooter response. And I asked the room, okay, shots are fired in the hallway. What do you think I'm going to do? And it was funny because unanimously the room was, oh, you'll go straight to it, right? Like you're a former British commando. You're going to go. I said, the first thing I'm going to do is pucker up. I'm going to flinch and I'm going to duck, just the same as everybody else.
Absolutely.
And they all look very confused by this. So I'm like, you're going to have the human response first. And how long that lasts will vary from person to person, depending on their capacity to handle the stress and what training they may have done in the past or experiences they've had. But even with those experiences, my response could be exactly the same as yours. Now, maybe my response to move towards the shots after the fact might be faster, but at the same time, maybe not. Maybe somebody in here has done 10 years of a thing and their response is smoother, faster, better, and off they go. I see you've always got to at least plan as much as you can for the human variable and the physiological responses. I know the first time, and this was just during training for us, the first time we had sort of shots fired in our direction, you talk about hugging walls. People congregate together. We all got magnets in our asses and we're all like, well, if I get close to this other dude, maybe he gets it and I don't. It's funny to watch. You've got to fight the urge to group. You've got to maintain your distance. And just that little thing, knowing that about yourself and knowing, okay, I've got to fight the urge to go to the wall or this guy who looks like he's broad and maybe can hide me. You got to fight all of these things. And that's where that repeated exposure to that level of stress and training ultimately gets you to a place where you go, okay, I've been here before. I know what I need to do versus what maybe I want to do instinctively. I'm pushing forward on this tactic or this strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the other thing that the shot simulation is great in pushing that in a active situation, if shots are being fired, what is the one advantage we have going for us? We don't have a lot of advantage. We don't know much. It's just we're getting overwhelmed. But the one advantage we do have when shots are being fired, and they're not being fired at us, is that somebody's focus is elsewhere. That is our chance to move, and that is our chance with that noise to let us come up. And then we also need to understand that if somebody is doing that and we're at the doorway or we're inside the room, whatever it may be, is we don't have to ask them politely to come and face us, to engage us. When can we use deadly force? Understanding that and take that target out, and that's something, but that is our advantage that we have almost no advantages. But if shots are being fired, their focus is elsewhere. And that is our chance to hopefully move and make the difference, and every second counts. But go back to, we can't rush to failure. And that's have to find that balance between speed and precision, I guess, that are we making the difference? And that's the hard part. But those tools that I talked about, we get people to have a little bit better feel for it, at least. It's never going to be exactly the same. It's not going to be the same as a real situation, but at least we get that natural body reaction of, like you said, that pucker factor, that knees buckling. And if you've never experienced it and you think, I'm going to be just fine. Like I said, if you don't have a reaction, you're probably a little bit on the mental side anyway, and I don't know if I want to be with you anyways.
No, that's funny, isn't it? You'll find out the level of humanity that person actually actually owns, because if their response is not in line with normal, then you have to start looking, okay, well, do we have some sort of level of psychopathy here? Like, I don't want to see someone giggling when the rest of us are.
Yeah. That's a little scary.
Yeah, I want a little fear. I'm like, okay, you and I are in this together. That's great. So I think what's one skill you think that every shooter could start practicing today that will actually help hold them up, hopefully successfully, if they ever end up in a real fight?
And I once again, I credit our use of we use the laser, the ammo, and the tabletops, and it's something that I introduce at our training. We have stations, so they're doing shooting drills, they're doing response to the CQB targets, shot box, they're doing a scenario. We do medical training, but we do tabletops. And one of the things that when I run it, or the guys that I have run it, we start with is I'm talking 5 yards away, asking people. First, I ask is, do you shoot with both eyes open or one eye open? And the ones that are shoot with one eye, I'm like, okay, today, there's no pass fail here. I want you to open both your eyes from this distance, look at the target, punch out, shoot the target with both eyes open. To me, and they do it after a while, they're like, oh gosh, this really works. I understand being back at maybe 25 yards, you want to get your best sight alignment, all these things, you're behind cover. But at combat range, you're probably going to have eyes saucer wide open looking at that
Yeah,
threat. And you'll quickly just teach them that your dominant eye will take over. Where you look is where you shoot, kind of deal. That's one of the things that I think we introduced, that from a combat perspective, because that's what you're going to do. And if you start, uh, understanding that, they talk about the 7 fundamentals of shooting: that sight alignment, sight picture, grip, stance, breathing, follow through, trigger press. I'm not saying any of that's not right. They all are vital, but be realistic. Is how important is stance in a high stress situation? Or is your stance going to be standing on a line shooting paper targets, or are you going to be running behind to get behind a tree? And that's where you have to be able to have that adaptability. Maybe the big thing is, I understand that the need for some standing there shooting targets time, but I really need to work on your combat shooting, stepping off the X, moving to cover with eyes open, acquiring your target, how your grip, all these little things become huge. But also understanding it's not going to be that I'm standing ready left, ready right, draw, fire one, and put it back in your holster. And that's just, we need to change kind of the way we train, I think, a lot of times. So
I agree. No, I think that's worth its weight in gold. I think the challenge for most people is finding a place that allows them to do it, which is then again, I sort of leads into find a class where you can do that. Because yes, you can practice the static shot, in whatever manner, you've gotten accustomed to shooting. But the reality is, in a fight, it's going to be completely dynamic. Everybody's going to be moving, and everything's going to be happening probably a lot faster than you even anticipate. So practicing what you're going to do in a fight versus perhaps getting, bullseyes on a target at the range where you're static and you've got all day to shoot and there's no stress, that's great for what it is, the fundamentals of getting accurate shots on. But the reality is, can you do even 10% of that with the pressure of somebody also shooting at you whilst you're trying to end the threat and perhaps, help family members or other people within your vicinity get out of the line of fire? It's a different world.
yeah, I think we get a little too caught up into having that pretty target. I'm probably no different when you're standing out the range. You want to have that,
Me too.
size of a baseball shot. But
Yes.
you think
Right.
about from a combat fighting it. If I'm trying to hit a button, but I hit the size of a volleyball on a center mass, I'm combat effective. And I think that's where we have to have that compromise, find that balance between speed and precision, when we're shooting, not rushing it. And that's where, once again, I'm a huge user and believer in like the laser ammo products. We use smart firearms, laser guns. Then we go to airsoft with that, with the recoil, where it's not replacing going to the range. But anywhere in any environment is a range, and it's safe. And because you said it's hard to find places that will allow you to move and shoot, step off the X, do double taps, all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do that. And all those things like your grip, your presentation, all that come into play where you can start, getting your fundamentals down. And it goes back to, becomes instinctive. And under stress, we go back to our instincts and our training. That's the best we can prepare ourselves, I think, for the real world. So,
No, I completely agree. It's a great point. It's training for the real world. It's not training for the false confidence a static range gives you, because I'm as guilty as the next person. I
Oh,
like putting, look at my grouping. It's beautiful, right? I mean, we
because
do.
your buddies beside you are going to be sitting there going, look, mine's better than yours. So that's going to happen. So.
Exactly. I like the idea that when they look in my lane, they're like, oh, damn, he shot a really tight group.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you can shoot that tight group, it's just fantastic static, and you are, I don't know, you lose 25% of your accuracy under stress, but you're still hitting the bloody target you need to hit. That is effective. It's managing all of the other variables, at the same time, because it's not just that one shot, it's the movement. It's not tripping over your own feet or somebody, in the aisle with you, depending on where the stuff goes down. It's just, and getting training that realistically sort of builds the reality of what you're really going to face, I think is absolutely critical.
And the thing that we talked about with getting comfortable with this and seeing the big picture is not only we have to worry about the threat, but we have to worry about what's behind that threat. Are there people between you and them? Do you have a clear shot? And that we have, like I said, we have a lot of disadvantages in a real situation. So you've got to try to take advantage of what, you can, but you also have to, I go back to not be overwhelmed by it the best you can. And that only comes from training and putting yourself to some stress in training. Now, overstressing people becomes a negative environment. But if we can show people under stress, they can react, get a little more comfortable with that. Honestly, gain confidence is huge because that's we're gonna have to adjust on the fly. And like I said, it's not going to be maybe as neat and as pretty as we had it planned out to be. So,
yeah. And I love the idea of helping people build their confidence, because you're going to need, as much of that as you can get in a real fight. But I also like the concept and the idea that they realize where they fall short, to understand the limitations of their own skills and be able to gauge from how they feel internally. Where's their heart rate? What level of cognitive abilities do they feel like they have? How much are their hands shaking? Can they make that shot? Should they make that shot? And so it kind of gives them that internal awareness to know, right now I am not optimal. Maybe I could, but maybe when you're talking about sending rounds out, especially in a public area, that's not good enough. You need to know, okay, yes, I'm, what would I say, 99.9% sure I'm going to make the shot. Well, that's a level of certainty I think most people can only aspire to, but should train to try and find. Understand that confidence will get you so far, absolutely, as will all the fundamentals, but you have to know yourself well enough to know, I'm not making that shot, to understand, where you might fall short.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, if you either believe you can or can't, that's what will happen, and and you've got to have that sense of confidence, which comes through training, that you're going to be able to succeed and that you will succeed, because the failure mentality is going to lead to failure. And I one thing you talk about as we do these, talking about, because I say it to myself all the time. I try to, stay in shape best I can, but our physical fitness levels, that we all need to continue to do the best we can with what we can, because it is such a stressful environment. The heart rate, the breathing. If you're winded within the first 10 seconds of the situation, it's going to only get worse. Like I said, reality training allows us to see our shortcomings, like you mentioned, and we have to look at those and go back and go, what should I change? It's something we did in SWAT. After every mission we went out on, we came back and went over, we call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. What went right, what went wrong, what could you do different? And we do that same thing at our training on active shooter response. We had the group, what did you do right? And give yourself credit for what you did right, but what can you do better? And if you have this idea that, oh, that was perfection, there's always something you could change and maybe adapt to. And also have an open mind to learn new skills. And you mentioned, I feel I'm still a student. I love hearing what other people are doing and saying and trying those things.
Mm-hmm.
and trying to put another tool in my toolbox. The basics are the basics. It's the little tweaks that you learn from high level people or, high level shooters, defensive tactics, whatever it is that you try to take and you try to add those to your repertoire. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel because that's I think another flaw, at least law enforcement has. They're always trying to come out with this new, latest, and greatest. This is going to solve all of our problems. The silver bullet mentality,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got to get away from that. But we have to have there's an old saying that the greatest enemy of change is success. Just because we've done it a long time and had success doesn't mean we can't change, and it doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel. But how do we have the ability to, uh, you know, look at something and say, hey, could I do this a little different? Could we start incorporating this? Maybe this person's got a point. All these different things learn from, and humility is maybe a big part of that.
Yeah, I one of the things I would do in my classes when I was teaching at the range, just like teaching martial arts, was always this is just one way. And you may not have the physicality, the skills, or completely disagree for whatever reason with what I'm showing you. This is just an example of what I have found works. And if it doesn't work for you, let's find what does. But invariably, the basics of that skill usually stay pretty much the same. And then we have these minor improvements from person to person, depending on their skill set, their physicality, their fitness. Everything impacts that person's ability to implement the thing you've just shown them, but staying with the basics first and then building out these little peripheral skill sets and different tools in the toolbox are, I think, always advantageous.
Absolutely. I mentioned this earlier that, when we're talking about maybe clearing hallways and we're going through with groups and when something I always want to point out to them that, look, we might do this 10 times. We might do it a little different every time, depending on, is this door open? Is the light on? All these different angles, whatever it may be. There's not one perfect, and SWAT team's the worst because I was with these guys. There's the SWAT way to do it. It's a perfect tactical way to do it. We might do it different every time, but as long as our team, whatever that is, whether it's yourself or one other or two other, as long as you're all on the same page and working as a unit, you can adapt with it. We get too caught up into, and I think it's one reason I like going out on site which is mostly what we're doing we do a lot of schools. I've never been in it until that day. Walking in, how would I assess this? How would we do this? And figuring out within minutes and running with it, because we do have a training center here in Wichita that we utilize to do some training. But if you get too caught up into this is the perfect way to do this because it's always laid out this way,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of giving yourself a false sense of security. And that's why we do have an area with movable walls and all that. We can change it up because it's never going to be the same. And we sometimes get a little too enamored with everything being neat and pretty and looking cool. And it's not always going to look cool. So the effective is more important than the cool factor. So
It is, yeah. It's going to get ugly in a hurry, and I think a lot of people are like, "Hold on a minute, this was supposed to be a pretty fight. I have great tactics and strategies."
Yeah.
You're like, "Yeah, well, you got punched in the face, and the situation changed."
Deal with it.
What you've shared has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining, taking the time out. For anyone that's interested in connecting with you or attending your classes, having you come in to do some of your training, where would you like them to go?
They can check us out at usdepu.org. Law enforcement, we do trainings. We get hosted by agencies or academies nationwide. It's something that we generally in an area they're bringing in area agencies to get as many as we can involved. I do want to point out that the name's a little misleading. It started as a sheriff's group. We long ago transitioned. We work with city, county, state, federal, and U.S. military law enforcement nationwide. Like I said, I do some private training as well, but I'm always love working with people. I do work with some local churches and some things on that aspect of it. I think it's kind of important, and some security groups. But you can reach us there at usw.org. You can sign up for we have a monthly newsletter, which usually sometimes has some videos, some training tips, and about what we're doing across the country. But you can also reach out to me on the website, direct, or it's info@usw.org. Shoot me an email. But I always want to interact as much as I can. I have a passion for this, and for people that want to get prepared for these situations that may or may not happen, to patriots that want to make a difference. That's always people I want to work with.
It's fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's been really enlightening and very enjoyable having this chat with you and kind of pulling up all of the top tips that you've shared. So thank you so much. All right, thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate everyone listening in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the show and help us bring you the guests you want to hear from. For now, everyone stay frosty, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Cheers.